Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is something different. So what I've got here are 3 different items that I've been listening to lately, and I figured, you know what, let's just do something different. Let's do kind of a rapid fire review of 3 different items in one video. And like typically, this is a live stream, so if you have any questions about these 3 items, you can ask me about them at the end of the review. But that's what we're going to do today. And just as a quick preview of what we're going to be reviewing, here we have the new Hifi P1 Plus, which is obviously a wired IM. Here we've got the ACMEE MF02S, which is a name that I'm probably going to forget between now and the next time I try to say it. So there you go. But this is a digital audio player. Pretty cool looking. And then finally, we've got over here the Moondrop Nekocake. This is Moondrop's latest true wireless IM. These are the 3 items that we will be doing reviews of today. So let's get into it. Like all my other reviews, I already mentioned this is a live stream. So if you have any questions about any of these 3 products, please do drop it in the live chat. And at the end of the review, I'm going to get through giving each of these a score. At the end of the review, stick around and we'll have a little bit of a live Q&A session. If you're watching now and it's not live, I'm sorry you missed out. That's okay though. Just subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and then YouTube should let you know next time I'm live. But I guess without further ado, let's jump back to the table and start talking about our first product of the day, which will be the Hifi P1 Plus. So this is, as I suggested, a wired IM, distinct from the others, but this is a follow-up to the original Hifi P1 that came out, I think, back in 2019. A lot here is very similar to the original P1, but there are some changes, and we're going to talk about those things. So I think with this rapid fire review, I'll just keep this short and kind of talk about what are the things I like about the product, what are the things maybe I don't love about it, and then we'll give it a score. So the P1 Plus, first of all, I guess shout out to Hifi for sending this in for review. You can find it on their website, linked down below. I think it's around 170 bucks, although does seem to be on sale right now for 160 bucks, so a little bit cheaper. But think about that price range. And what's unique about the P1 and the P1 Plus is that unlike a lot of other IMs, this is actually a planar magnetic driver, which is pretty unique. So that's cool, but let's just get into talking about what I like about it. So for starters, the cable, right? The original P1, it had a cable that frankly looked a lot like this, very similar in color, but it was a problematic cable. It was just a really sloppy, kind of cheap cable. This cable is a big improvement over the original P1 cable. I wouldn't say this is like my favorite cable or anything like that. It can be a little bit on the kinky side, but it's also maybe a little bit on the thin side, but frankly, I don't know, it's a fine cable. And I'm just saying that this is one of the things I like because it was such a bad cable on the original P1, and I'm glad that at least they improved that. Otherwise, physically, this thing is identical to the original P1, at least on the external, which is all that I personally get to interact with. Other things that I like about the new P1 Plus is that, well, one, it's a little bit easier to drive than the original P1. So you might recall if you have been following my reviews, when I reviewed the original P1, one of the things I called out about it is that it requires a lot more power than your typical earphone. And that's no longer the case here with the P1 Plus. They've actually made it more sensitive. I would say this is still not like the most sensitive I am, but it's no longer a concern for me. Like it's sensitive enough that I think any smartphone is going to be plenty powerful enough to power the P1 Plus. So that's good. Those are just kind of addressing shortcomings with the original P1 though. So what else do I like about this? So the sound on the P1 Plus, I really quite like. And I still like the original sound on the original P1. And here with the P1 Plus, it's more or less the same, but there are a couple of differences. So what I like about the tuning generally is it's just got a nice, warm, even mid-range tuning with a bit of a treble pizzazz that gives it a really strong sense of clarity and a decent sense of definition and stage without it being, like a V-shaped bassy monster. In fact, I would say bass on the P1 and the P1 Plus is pretty light, although the bass here is actually a little bit better extended than it was on the original P1, and that much I like. What else do I want to say? I think one of the things I like about the sound of the P1 and the P1 Plus is it just kind of gives me this sense of like an organic sound that I don't quite get in a lot of other IEMs. And I think a lot of that I attribute to just kind of the flat frequency response plus that extended treble. That combination, I find it just a really nice, pleasing tonality. So yeah, generally quite like the sound here on the P1 Plus. Maybe get into a little bit more detail about what's different between the P1 Plus and the original. I would say that the vocals come across a tad warmer here on the P1 Plus. I would say it's not significant, and frankly, the original P1 was already a fairly warm mid-range, but here it is actually a little bit warmer, which just means that vocals are not going to have quite the same level of presence, but we're talking pretty small amount, so that's a fairly modest difference. The bigger differences are going to be in the bass and the upper treble, where both the original P1 and the P1 Plus have really, really significantly extended treble. But for some reason, it doesn't really graph that different on the P1 Plus, but I did find that in listening experience, I find it less distracting here. It just seems a little bit better integrated into the rest of the frequency response or the rest of the music. And whether or not that's a factor of the modest tonal balance differences that you can measure with the frequency response, or maybe it's perhaps something else, I'm not totally sure, but I can say that the treble I found on here, less distracting, although it can still be somewhat of a slightly distracting upper treble tizziness, just less so here with the P1 Plus. The biggest difference is honestly in the bass, and I mentioned that the bass here on the P1 Plus is better extended than it was on the original P1, and that accounts for not just in the stock form. So the original P1, the sub bass kind of started to roll off, although you could modify it to get the bass to extend well into the sub bass frequencies. Here you get that sub bass extension without the modification, but even versus the original P1 with the modification, I think the bass on the P1 Plus is noticeably tighter and just punchier, and it's got a little bit stronger of a physicality. Again, this is not a bassy IEM, so if you're looking for a bassy IEM, you will be disappointed by the P1 and the P1 Plus. But if you like a bass light sound, like I tend to like, but you still like to have a sense of physicality and a little bit of rumble, I think that the bass here on the P1 Plus is an upgrade over the original P1. So what don't I like about the new P1 Plus? I mean, for starters, I think it just doesn't sound that different from the original P1. So apart from the fact that, you know, there are a couple of improvements, it really only stands out in direct head-to-head comparison that I was able to pick out those differences. Otherwise, if I just heard these things a day apart, I would think that they sound just about the same. So yeah, I don't know. If you're going to release a new IEM, you might as well, oh, sorry, I got to ban someone from live chat in real time. Please hold. All right, addressed. But yeah, apart from that, like, I feel like if you're going to release a new IEM, you might as well make it a little bit more different than the P1 Plus, but there you go. I just think there's no reason to upgrade to this if you've already got the original P1. Other things that I can say I don't love about the P1 Plus would be the fit. It's fine. It's just, I don't know, it feels a little bit insubstantial in the ear. It doesn't feel as secure as something like, in fact, you know what? I'll just go ahead and demonstrate this for you. It doesn't feel as doesn't feel as substantial. That's the word. As something like I don't know, a more molded, custom fitted IEM. But I don't know. It's certainly comfortable enough, like it fits inside the ear, doesn't take up a lot of space. It's just not the most secure fitting IEM, and I do find that, you know, as I'm talking or sleeping and stuff like that, it can tend to lose its seal over time, which was an issue with the original P1, and because this is in the exact same housing, it's also still an issue with the P1 Plus. And then the last thing that I'll warn about this, and it's just that, you know, while I quite like the sound of both the original P1 and the P1 Plus, it is worth acknowledging that it is maybe somewhat of a polarizing sound. There are a lot of reviews out there that are not very positive about the P1 and the P1 Plus, and there's also some reviews that are really positive out there. And I'm just bringing that up because I know there are certain IEMs where I don't have to make that caveat. Something like the Tantrum Hana 21, that's just a sound that anyone's going to like. The P1 Plus, This is for someone that wants a mid-range focused sound with a really unique organic timbre to it. And if you're looking for a bassy IM, an all-rounder that you can hand to anyone and they'll be instantly impressed, I don't think the P1 Plus is that. So out of 5 stars, I gotta give this thing a score. The P1 Plus, I give this thing still a very solid 4 stars. This is an IM that, it's interesting because it's not that different than the IM that came out 2 years ago, but frankly, I still enjoy listening to it today, and I think that's pretty cool. So that is the Tin Hi-Fi P1 Plus. Let's go ahead and pull in product numero dos, which is this, the ACMEE MF02S. And I'm not going to speculate on what MF stands for, but you can use your imagination. But yeah, this is a digital audio player that comes to me via Linsol Audio. Shout out to Linsol. Link to them in the description down below. And this is a pretty unique little player. So the price on this is not cheap. This is around $330, which frankly, that's pretty real money when it comes to the DAP game. This is not a budget DAP, but frankly, it's got a lot of things about it that feel pretty budget. We'll start with the things that I like, which is the general build quality on this thing is an all aluminum shell. Do a quick close-up of this, and I do think that what I have here is sort of a limited edition that comes in this gold color. Actually costs an extra $30, but otherwise it comes in sort of a gunmetal gray color, silver, something like that. But I don't know, the build quality on this thing is really nice. It's got a nice weight to it. It's not overly heavy, but it definitely doesn't feel cheap, doesn't feel lightweight. The buttons all have a nice tactility to them, a nice clickiness, which I appreciate. Yeah, I don't know, generally pretty into the aesthetic. It's a little bit bizarre, but I think it's frankly pretty cool looking. In fact, including this volume dial that you got up here, which is another thing that I think is one of my favorite things here about the MF02S. It's this volume dial knob. I tried to say both at once. But it's got like this nice knurling on it, which gives you a decent grip on it, so you can operate it one-handed pretty easily. I appreciate that. It also has a clicking action, so you can press in on it to get a separate button press. And generally, I'm just kind of a sucker for volume knobs, so pretty excited about that. What else can I say that I like about this thing? It gets hot, which might sound like a weird thing for someone to say that they like, but I don't know. When we're talking about audiophile stuff, a lot of it for me is the appeal of the aesthetic of it, and the aesthetic of it is not just visual for me. It's about how does the thing feel in your hand? What is it like to operate? How does it make you feel as a person? And the fact that this thing gets nice and warm and toasty when you're using it, I find, it could certainly be a downside. When I tried using this in bed, it was frankly too warm to use, but just in, walking around the house using it, kind of like that it gets hot. I don't know. And then let's talk about the sound. I think the sound on this thing is frankly pretty good. Hiss is very minimal. Yeah, if you go on Linsol's listing of the MF02S, they've got some specs on it that frankly I won't get too much into. I think the DAC that it uses is an ESS DAC. It's an ES9038Q2M, if that means anything to you. They also are very particular about the op amps that they've got in here. Those numbers and stuff, frankly, don't mean that much to me. What matters is the actual listening experience, and I can say this thing sounds really, really quite clean. Plenty of power for all of the headphones that I connected to it. And in fact, it's actually got despite the fact that it's got pretty good power, it's also got, pretty good control over hiss. A lot of these sort of, again, this isn't exactly a budget digital audio player, but a lot of these, sub $1,000 high-powered DAPs, they'll basically give you a lot of power at the expense of just having a noisy, hissy output jack, assuming that you're going to connect these things to a powerful headphone that's going to cut out that hiss. Well, even with very sensitive IMs, I found the hiss on this thing very, very minimal, and that includes over the balanced 4.4 millimeter connector. So it does have 3.5 millimeter single-ended as well as 4.4 millimeter balanced. You're going to get more power out of the balanced, but thankfully the amplifier hiss was actually not bad. The well, I'll save the bad for later. Well, maybe we can talk about the bad now, because that's about as much good stuff as I got to say about this thing. I really dislike this player, frankly. So what I was about to get into is the output impedance on this thing is actually pretty high. I'm not going to hold that too much against it. There are some other players out there that I like that have high output impedance, but basically what that means is certain IEMs, especially ones that have balanced armatures, if you connect them to this player, they're going to be very significantly warping the frequency response. So I use my Maga OC-K5 as an example. It's an all balanced armature set. Connected to this, it just sounds really, really quite warm and thick and muddy versus what it would sound like normally. Now, if you're listening to your typical dynamic driver headphone or even IEM, probably not going to run into that issue. So I'm not saying this is a warm sounding DAP, but if you are listening to it with balanced armatures, there's a very good chance it's going to warp the sound there. Physically, I think just a small note to the folks at ACMEE, the audio jacks you can see here are slightly recessed, which for me thankfully was not a problem, but I could imagine that being a problem for some 3.5mm jacks especially. Again, none of mine are wide enough for that to be an issue, but I can't imagine that some headphone jacks might have a trouble fitting in there, and that could be frankly pretty annoying. But really most of what I dislike about this player is all about the usability. The UI of this thing, it friggin' sucks, okay? Where do we start with? Okay, let's start with some maybe technical stuff, technical UI stuff. So micro SD cards. I tried a bunch of micro SD cards, including 3 different 128 gig cards. None of my 128 gig cards would work with this thing. They're all SanDisk cards, so there's nothing different between my cards in terms of like brand and manufacturer, or file format, or anything like that. But I could not get the 128 gig cards to work. So I've got a 32 gig card in here, I think, at the moment. That's a bit of a problem. Problem number 2 is there's no ID3 scanning in this thing, at least as far as I can tell. So let's see if I navigate this menu, and as I'm doing this, hopefully you're getting a sense for some of the other problems that I have with this player. Let's see. All right, so you do have to scan the SD card in order for the music to show up. But what's really irritating is that even though you're scanning the music, it doesn't actually ever read the ID3 tags. Like, I'm basically just navigating folders, which seems like if all you're going to do is make me navigate folders and show me, .FLAC file names in my list of songs, and you're not going to show me, like, I'm playing this song now, I'm not getting album art or anything like that. Like, why am I even scanning the memory card? I mean, on the bright side, it seems pretty quick to scan the memory card, but again, I've only got a 32 gig card in here with a limited supply of music, so those are some problems that I have. Battery life on this thing is not phenomenal. It's, you'll definitely want to enable the options that will make it power itself off after a couple of minutes, because otherwise it will drain its battery within about a day. And then because it's powering itself off, that means every time you want to get into it, you're going to have to power it back on, which, has about 10 seconds of boot up time, which is a bit of an irritant. But all of this is still like not my biggest issues with this player. My biggest issues really are just with the quality of the UI. Like, look at what we're looking at right here. This is pretty hideous. But even worst of all, and this is the part that's going to be hard for me to convey to you, is just how god-awful the button configuration is on this thing, okay? You've got play, you've got track skipping over here. That seems like it's reasonable, right? You've got a power button up here. That seems like it's reasonable. So why is this thing so insane? Well, over here you've got a back button, and you've got a menu button. And frankly, I have no idea what will happen if I press this menu button right now. I think it'll take me to the play screen. Okay, I had an idea. But now if I press the menu button, it takes me to this screen. I don't know why it shows me this screen. If I press it again, then it'll start navigating the menu. Basically, this button loops. What? I don't see. I'm still confused about what it's doing. The back button just went back there. It's so bad. Does anyone remember like using the UI on a television from like 10 years ago? maybe even modern televisions if you're trying to use the UI just using buttons on the television, where you just like, it just doesn't make sense, like where the buttons are laid out, because they're probably laid out vertically or all horizontally, and you're trying to navigate up and down menus and stuff like that. Frankly, that's what this thing feels like. It hurts my brain. The buttons don't make sense to me. They're not really consistent either. Like I mentioned, there's this play pause button over here, which seems sensible, except that play pause button and the up and down buttons also double as navigating the menu. So when I'm on a menu, I have no access to playing and pausing the music. In fact, I don't even have access to changing the volume, because now, let's see if I can go over to another menu with more stuff. Now the volume knob, I'm not able to say that word together. Knob, dial, dob. We just invented it. But here, the volume knob, it's doubling as navigating up and down the menu, and that just means I don't have access to controlling the volume or controlling playback while I'm navigating this thing. And so in addition to just the buttons not making any sense to me, you also just don't have access to core player functionality while you're navigating it. And frankly, I find that basically inexcusable for a digital audio player. Like, if I'm buying a digital audio player, it's because I want nice buttons and I want a nice UI for interacting with my music. And frankly, this thing fails at all of that. So out of 5 stars, the ACMEE MF02S, frankly, you just get the one. It's physical, build quality is nice. Again, sound quality is pretty nice, as long as you're not using a sensitive IEM that might get the frequency response warped. But the UI is just unusable. And for 330 bucks, 360 bucks for this special edition that I've got right here, I don't know. Personally, I find this I would steer away from it. So that brings us to the Moondrop Nekocake. And I'm going to try and stick with that pronunciation through this video. This is a true wireless IM, the latest one from Moondrop. They earlier came out with the Moondrop Sparks. That was just a couple of months ago. But here, the Nekocake, this is actually a cheaper true wireless IM, 43 bucks. And shout out to Shenzhen Audio for sending this in for review. Link to them in the description down below. But what's interesting is that despite this being cheaper than the Sparks, it's actually got active noise canceling in it, which the Sparks doesn't have. So that seems kind of cool, at least on paper. So let's go ahead and talk about what I like and don't like about the Nekocake. So what I like, first of all, the fit on the Nekocake, I actually quite like a lot. Let's see if we can do a little bit of a demonstration. So these things fit, frankly, a lot like the AirPods Pro. So they just plug into my ear, nice and easy, not fiddly at all. There's not a deep fit. They're not uncomfortable. They're very comfortable to fit. And for me, I found them plenty secure. So I generally like the fit of AirPods Pro, and the fact that the Nekocake is essentially cribbing that fit, I think was actually a good move from them. So that I like about them. Another thing that's kind of cool about these things is that when you plug these things in your ear, all right, a lot of true wireless IMs, they got to give you some sort of noises or voices to give you feedback about what's happening. Moondrop, actually, they used their VTube. They have a VTuber. That's right. Most audio brands don't have VTubers, but Moondrop has a VTuber. Their VTuber did the voiceover for the commands here, and frankly, it's pretty cute. Like, I enjoy it. It's just like a cute voice prompt. It tells you, connected. It's very cheerful, very positive. It just kind of makes them joyful to use in a way that, I can't say that about most true wireless IMs. So that I quite like. And then the tuning, the sound on these things. I'll leave the sound for last. I'll talk about that in a little bit. The one other thing that I like about these things is that, okay, they do have touch controls, which generally I don't like, and we'll talk about those a little bit later too, in more depth. But what I do like about the touch controls here is that, one, they are customizable. There is an app that goes along with the Nekocake, and you can customize the touch controls, which includes the ability to disable any single tap controls, which for me is huge. My biggest problem with touch controls on these things is that when an IM or an earphone has touch controls that can be activated with a single tap, it's just way too easy to accidentally activate by accident. So being able to disable single tap and just map whatever controls you want to double taps, triple taps, and long taps, frankly, I think that's pretty smart, and you're able to do that here with the Nekocake. So I like that. Okay, the sound, I was just getting to talk about the sound. That's another thing that I do like here on the Nekocake. You know, $43, set your expectations, but I think in this budget true wireless space, there's nothing out there that really has the tuning of the Nekocake. I would describe this as a somewhat bright, lean, neutral sound signature with a nice, tasteful sub-bass emphasis. Basically, just think of this as like somewhat bright neutral with a nice little sub-bass bump to give it a nice, fun sound. I would describe this as, frankly, a very mature sound for a budget true wireless. And then if you don't love the sound, if you don't want a mature sound signature, you can go into the app and pick some of the other preset tunings, which are all very different, which I appreciate. And there are a couple on there that are very much bass head tunings. I think they don't sound very good. The tunings that I liked best on this are the stock tuning, and then there's another one that's called Moondrop Classic, which adds a little bit of brightness in the upper treble. For some reason, oddly, like lowers the total volume of it by about 40%. But for me, I had no problem getting plenty of volume out of these anyway. So generally, I don't know, this thing sounds pretty decent. Again, the tuning is pretty unique for the price range, but what are the things I don't love about the Nekocake? So the tuning, while I like the tuning, I think these still do sound somewhat low resolution. I'm not sure if it's, you know, related to the fact that they're AAC only. I've definitely heard some AAC IEMs or true wireless IEMs that sound plenty good. Frankly, here it does sound a little bit on the low resolution side. But for the most part, honestly, for $43, I'm pretty happy with the sound. My bigger issues with these things are with a couple of software issues. So the touch controls I already alluded to. I like the fact that you can customize them and you can get rid of the single tap controls. But other than that, like the touch controls on these things are just really pretty flaky. So the touch area I think is like somewhere up in here, but it's really like nondescript, and when you're feeling around for it with your fingers while these things are in your ears, it can be very easy to accidentally tap the wrong place. And because the IEM seems to take about 1 second, maybe a second, like a full second is overstating it a little bit, but it's around a half a second to a full second in between an input and the input registering. It feels really clumsy, frankly. And so like I'll double tap, you have to wait a second, and then hopefully you get the beep that confirms that it's registered and gonna do what you think it's gonna do, or sometimes it just doesn't work because you happen to tap slightly too low. And I don't know, I find that to be, I don't know, pretty cumbersome. Frankly, it's part of like why I just generally don't like touch controls on these things. And here on the Nekocake, I think partly because it's also a little bit delayed, a little bit slow to respond, that makes it just a little bit extra worse. Even worse than that, however, is that sometimes the touch controls just actually flat out don't work. There's a number of times where I pull these things out, I start listening to music on them, play them with my phone, but the touch controls just don't work. And I'm dealing with those issues I was just describing, where it's a little bit inconsistent with the touch controls, and like sometimes maybe I'm touching the wrong place, and so maybe that's, but no, sometimes I swear the touch controls just don't work. So I have to put them back into the case, close the lid, they power off, pull them back out, get them to reconnect, and then the touch controls work as expected, which is, I don't know, that's pretty sus, frankly. But that's not honestly the only issues that I had with the connectivity here with the Nekocake. You might have recalled during my first look unboxing video where I tried to make a frequency response of this. I could not get these things to produce a frequency response on my iMac. I don't know what that's about. I wouldn't hold that too much against it because it worked fine when I connected it to my MacBook, but those weren't the only problems I had. Even connected to my Android phone, this is the one I use. It's just a simple Sony Xperia 10. Even connected to this, sometimes when I'd pull these things out, they would connect. I could see that they were connected. It would say connected, but no sound would come out of it. I could even use the controls, the tap controls, to toggle pause play, and I could see that in my music app on my phone, it was registering and the music was playing, but no sound would come out of the Nekocake. until I put them back in the case, shut the case, powered them off, took them back out, got them to reconnect, and then that solved my problems. But I don't know about you, but for me, I don't really want to deal with that with true wireless IMs. I don't want to really deal with that with anything. And that was a pretty big downer here with the Nekocake. The last thing that I'll talk about that I don't love about these things is the ANC, right? The active noise canceling. They do have active noise canceling, which is kind of cool, I guess. But I don't know. On the bright side, it doesn't seem to adjust the frequency response, which is cool. If you want to check it out on squig.link, I have these things measured with ANC turned on and off. I appreciate that it doesn't seem to affect the frequency response, but it also doesn't seem to affect much else. I mean, the ANC, like a lot of other budget true wireless ANCs, will kind of cut out some low frequency rumbles, but it's really pretty minimal. The trade-off is that then you get this kind of high frequency hiss that's just ever present. So maybe in certain scenarios, if I'm on like a bus or something like that, maybe I would want to trade the high frequency hiss for cutting out some of the low end rumble. But during, just normal listening sessions, sitting on my couch, I prefer to turn ANC off because in my house, I don't have low frequency rumbles that these things were any good at cutting out. So frankly, turning on ANC just meant turning on hiss, which I don't need. So that's what I think about the Moondrop Nekocake. Again, I like the fit, I like the sound. $43, it's not a bad sound, but because of the software issues, I can't really recommend it. So out of 5 stars, Nekocake, unfortunately, you're going to get just 2 stars. So that is my review of the Moondrop Nekocake, the ACMEE MF02S, and I probably got that wrong a couple of times. In fact, maybe even right there. And the Hifi P1 Plus. If you're interested in checking out any of these 3 products, I do have them linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please do hit the like button, assuming you liked the video. Subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and then I'll catch you on the next super review, unless you're here live, in which case, hang out and let's have a little chat.